The kingdom of Flus had always been a land of gold-lit towers, quiet rivers, and bells that sang at sunrise. From the high balconies of the Crystal Palace, you could see green valleys stretching to the horizon, dotted with villages where laughter carried through the wind. Life was peaceful, a tapestry woven with threads of light and song. But on the night the darkness came, the bells did not ring. A storm gathered over the capital, not a normal storm. The clouds were black as ink and twisted like living things. Lightning flickered inside them, but no thunder followed, just an eerie, unsettling silence. People in the bustling streets of Flus looked up nervously as the wind grew sharp and cold, whispering of a change they couldn't understand. Inside the Crystal Palace, King Aeron, his face etched with worrying, stood by a tall window overlooking his kingdom. "The scouts?" he asked, his voice low and heavy. A knight knelt before him, his armor scratched and dented from a long and harrowing journey. "Your Majesty, the eastern forests are gone." The king's brow furrowed. "Gone." The knight looked up, his eyes wide with a terror that went beyond battle. "Swallowed by shadow, the villages too, the people? They say the darkness moves. It has a will." The king's face hardened, his regal posture straightening with resolve. "Send word to every fortress. Light every beacon." Flus does not bow to shadows, but as the knight hurried away to carry out his orders, a strange thing happened. The torches lining the palace walls flickered, their flames shrinking and then dimmed. Outside, the unnatural storm began to whisper, a sound like 1,000 voices just beyond the edge of hearing. The darkness was listening. 3 nights later, the army of Flus gathered beyond the city's formidable iron gate. 10,000 soldiers stood ready, shields raised high, their polished surfaces reflecting the pale, nervous torchlight. Banners bearing the golden sun of Flus snapped in the cold, biting wind. At their front rode General Kellis, the kingdom's greatest warrior, his legendary sword already drawn, its edge gleaming under the starless sky. Across the valley, a shift in the landscape drew every eye. Something moved. At first, it looked like a dense fog rolling over the hills, a common sight in the early morning. But this was different. Shapes began to form inside it. Figures, hundreds of them, then thousands. They were creatures made of darkness itself, their forms indistinct, their eyes glowing like dying embers in a cold hearth. A young soldier, barely old enough to grow a beard, whispered in a trembling voice, "What are they?" General Kellis, his gaze fixed on the approaching horror, didn't turn. His voice was grim but steady. "They are fear-given form." With a silent, unified surge, the Shadow Army rushed forward. The ground itself seemed to shake as they collided with the soldiers of Flus in a cataclysmic clash. Steel cut through darkness, swords and spears finding their marks. But every creature that fell seemed to dissolve, only to rise again from the very ground itself, reformed and relentless. The air filled with the sounds of battle, but they were soon drowned out by screams of terror that echoed across the valley as soldiers vanished, pulled into the black, churning tide. Within minutes, the carefully arranged front lines of Flus collapsed into chaos. General Kellis, his voice raw with desperation, shouted commands that were lost in the din. "Fall back! To the walls! To the walls!" But it was too late. The darkness was too fast, too overwhelming. It followed them, clinging to them like a predatory plague. By dawn, the capital was in utter chaos. A flood of refugees, their faces streaked with soot and tears, poured through the remaining gates. Mothers clutched their children, running through smoke-filled streets where the familiar sights of home were now scenes of devastation. The bells in the city towers finally rang, not their cheerful morning song, but a wild, desperate alarm as the city guards rushed to prepare the final defenses. From the highest palace tower, Princess Lyra watched the black storm creeping closer, an unstoppable stain spreading across the land. It was consuming everything, village by village, forest by forest. Soon it would reach the city walls. Her old advisor, his face pale and drawn, spoke quietly beside her. "Your father prepares for a siege." Lyra shook her head, her eyes never leaving the encroaching doom. "This isn't a siege." Her advisor looked at her, confused. "What do you mean, Your Highness?" She pointed to the horizon, where the edge of the darkness was now swallowing the rising sun, blotting out its golden rays. "It's the end of Flues." That night, the full force of the Shadow Army arrived. The sky vanished completely, hidden behind endless, swirling black clouds. The moon could not be seen, its gentle light was extinguished. Then the city gates began to tremble. Boom, boom, boom. A heavy, rhythmic impact shook the very foundations of the city. Something massive was striking the walls. Soldiers braced themselves, planting their feet as cracks spread like spiderwebs through the ancient, hallowed stone. With a final, thunderous crash, the outer gate shattered. Darkness poured into the streets like a living flood. The shadow creatures climbed over rooftops, silent and swift, dragging guards into the shadows and extinguishing every torch they touched, plunging the city into absolute blackness. The city of Flues, a beacon of civilization that had stood for 1,000 years, was collapsing in a matter of hours. King Aeron watched from the palace balcony as fire spread through his beloved city, the flames a stark contrast to the overwhelming dark. He was a king watching his kingdom die. In a broken whisper, he spoke one sentence to the empty air. "Flues, forgive me, but there was one last, desperate hope." Deep beneath the palace, in an ancient chamber few remembered, Princess Lyra stood before a glowing relic. The heart of Flues. It was a massive crystal that pulsed with a soft, warm golden light, the last light in the dying city. The old records, dusty scrolls she had spent years studying, said it was the very source of the kingdom's protection, the light that had kept the darkness at bay for generations. But now its light flickered weakly as if it were succumbing. Behind her, the palace shook violently as the shadow creatures breached the gates above. She could hear their unnatural shrieks echoing through the halls. Her advisor's voice was urgent, filled with panic. "If the heart goes out, the kingdom dies with it." Lyra closed her eyes and placed her hands on the crystal's smooth, cool surface. She could feel its faint pulse, a dying heartbeat. Outside, the screams of battle and death grew closer. Tears ran down her face, hot against her cold skin. "If this fails," she whispered to the fading light, "no one will remember Flues." As she spoke, the crystal flared. A blinding wave of pure golden light exploded outward, surging through the palace, blasting through the streets, and crashing through the city walls. The darkness shrieked, a sound of pure agony, as it was pushed back. For a moment, just one glorious moment, the night itself seemed to break, and the golden sun of Flues shone through the cracks. When the light faded, the Shadow Army had retreated, pushed back beyond the valley. The city was half destroyed. Thousands were gone, lost to the shadow. And the storm, though distant, still waited on the horizon, a constant, menacing promise. But Flues, broken and bleeding, still stood, barely. King Aeron looked out across his ruined capital, the morning light revealing the full extent of the devastation. He spoke quietly, his voice hollow. This was only the first night. From the tower, Princess Lyra stared toward the distant darkness, the weight of what was to come settling upon her. And the next one, maybe worse. Across the shattered city, the bells of Flues finally rang again. Not in celebration or in relief, but in warning. A somber, defiant promise that they were still there and they would fight until the very end.